Vandy should have an above average pass game in 2024.
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Vandy podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Corey Burton. Thanks for making Locked On Vandy your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's episode, we look at the most underrated game on the schedule in terms of importance. That's Alcorn State. Yeah. And we look at why Vandy should have an above average passing game in 2024 and what that means. So the guiding question to this whole episode is this: can Vandy average over 250 yards in passing per game? I think the answer to that question, and this was a very interesting question, speaking of which, brought on by Sean Williams at vandysports.com. Love that. Love that question. Love that prompt. It kind of got me thinking as far as like how Vandy's offense is constructed. What do they do well? You know, how's this thing look? Okay. And so that stat is kind of one of those where you're thinking, they could get there, or that's a bit of a stretch, right? So I think it's a very interesting question because I think it could go a lot of different ways. And I think the answer, honestly, is yes and no. Okay? Yes and no. Now, what does that mean even? They should have an above average passing game. That's what that means. Yes and no. Okay? Yes, they can average 250 yards per passing per game. No, they can't average 250 yards passing per game. I think there's going to be games where there's going to be a stretch of games where they are averaging that. And then there's going to be some like outliers to where like the season average is not 250 yards per game. But I think you're going to have performances in there that get it pretty close. So, you know, I think you're going to have I think what that means is your overall average probably won't be 250 if you look at all 12 games. But when you look at the games, you're going to have games in the 300s, you're going to have games in the 100s. Like you're going to have all kind of things. And I think it's going to be, I think the main factor is going to be the rush game. Okay. How well is the run game going? How well are they protecting? Are there injuries? Things like that. Those are like the basic factors to see. So the first thing I'm going to do is tell you why I think they have a legitimate shot and can. Okay. And that's because of the way the offense is constructed, okay? It's going to be a run-heavy offense, okay? We all know that. It's going to be run-heavy based on the quarterbacks they signed, based on the philosophy that was carried over from New Mexico State. They were very run-centric. They enjoyed running the ball, not only with the running backs, but with the quarterbacks and on jet sweep. So they've got a little bit of that element coming into the offense. And they've invested a lot in the offensive line. So I think with that being said, I think part of the run game is going to be option. And part of option now is RPO and screens. So I think with screens and those things, I think you're going to rack up a lot of yards that you didn't think you were going to have just by throwing a bunch of 5-yard slants or getting 5, 6, 7, 8 yards on some of these fast screens. And some of these fast screens might turn into explosives, which are plays over 20 yards. And you're going to see some of these slants and some of these hitches that go for first downs. That stuff adds up, right? Especially if you dink and dunk your way down the field, you could very easily, by taking very few deep shots, and you could very easily get up over 250 yards just by collecting slants, hitches, quick screens, and gaining yardage on that. Because, you know, there's a ton to be had in the quick game, in the RPO game, because what it does, the stress it puts on a defense in the RPO game, you're stretching a defense horizontally and a little bit vertically, and you're creating windows. And when you create windows, if you can complete those passes, if the quarterbacks read it correctly and they complete those passes, you are in really good shape there to pick up some mondo yardage. Last year, that stuff wasn't happening. Last year, the totals were, I don't want to say they were abysmal, but like they weren't great because they weren't consistent. They weren't staying on the field long enough to rack up those plays because they had no identity. And they're going against loaded boxes, and you can't protect a quarterback and you can't block for the run game against the 8-9-man box where it seems like the house is coming every single play. And so they were a little hamstrung by that. Now, they've improved their offensive line, even though the depth still isn't there. So if there's injuries, they're screwed. But they've improved the offensive line. They've made sure to revamp that talent-wise. I think they've got 7 or 8 guys, I think, that can play. And although that's not ideal for depth purposes, I think it is ideal if you're wanting to have that flip in talent on the offensive line, a dire position of need and in need of improvement. They got a new philosophy, new coach, brought in some new talent, developing some of the talent they had, and then hoping to see what they have in the pipeline. There's a lot of mysteries in the pipeline too. They could have 12 guys that could pop out and be really, really good. We just don't, like, beyond like 8 that we know will be pretty good. We don't know anything about the others that are on the roster and how good they could be until we get into fall camp and maybe get into some of these games like Alcorn State, Ball State, those type games. So you have a revamped offensive line. That's the good news. And I think even in the even in the drop back and play action passing game, you will get better protection because you have a revamped offensive line, because presumably you're going to have success running the ball. I think in the play action game, if you have success running the ball, teams will actually think, or they might have to actually honor the run fake because the offensive linemen are going to come off with low hats, that you can actually get yourself into some good protection schemes and get teams to not be sending the house all the time because they can't, because they don't want to get caught up in a blitz and get gashed for a big play because they wanted to come after you on first, second, third down. And next thing you know, you've got teams playing base defenses, and that lightens boxes, that creates matchups, and that creates things in the passing game as well that you can take advantage of because your quarterback is not under constant duress and running for his life all the time. That doesn't mean that whoever's in at quarterback, whether it's Pavia, Nate Johnson, or whoever, that doesn't mean they're not going to be running for their life at all, because they will be, because it's just the SEC. That happens sometimes. There's going to be sacks, there's going to be pressures, there's going to be hurries. But at the rate they were hitting Vanderbilt last year, you're not going to have that. So I think just being successful on the ground is going to give you opportunities to stay on the field in order to rack up those passing yards. So I think that's a factor. I think that's going in favor of you. Now, when I say above average, I just don't know how this talent's going to shake out. But if they can get up to like 65, possibly 70 plays per game, they have a legitimate chance of actually achieving that goal and having a great passing game, right? Elite would be averaging well over 300 yards per game. That I don't think they'll ever have an elite passing game. They're just not built for that. But they will have a very, very, very formidable passing game. So I'm excited about it. They have the receivers to do it, I think. Not quite the star power that they just got rid of. And I think that's what's creating a lot of pause with people is like, well, who are the guys we got in here? Like, can these, no offense, but like, these are a bunch of no-name guys, right? Guys that you're like, well, he's a cast off from Ole Miss. He couldn't crack the field at Texas Tech, or, he's coming from Louisiana Monroe, Darian Wiley. He was playing defensive back last year at Notre Dame. So Quincy Skinner was the 5th receiver on the depth chart. Junior Sherrill only had 2 good games here. Richie Hoskins is a walk-on. So, like, I think it's a legitimate concern that people are just like, and then you have freshmen after that people are like, who the heck are these people trying to play receiver? And I get that. But, like, if you look at the skill sets and how they're going to be integrated into the offense, I think my prediction and my speculation is that Tim Beck understands, scheme-wise, will understand how to put these guys in positions to do what they do best and be able to actually take advantage of their talent. Like Jeremiah Dillon is a smooth downfield runner. I think your deep shots are going to go through him. I think, Quincy Skinner's a tough, he can do just about anything. He's a versatile guy, versatile receiver. Same with Darian Wiley. Same with Michael Bell. I think you have a bunch of scrappy guys that can get open, catch the ball in the RPO game or the screen game and make some yards. I think every single one of them can do it. I think Loic Foungy can be your target guy, big target guy. And I think no matter how this room shakes out, you're going to have production there because you have talented players. Like Jeremiah Dillon was a former 4-star recruit coming out of high school. So he's not short on talent. He was short on opportunity because Ole Miss had a loaded room. So I think every bit of that can be because screens and RPOs and staying on the field will help just increase the amount of plays that you have per game. And if you can turn some of those screens into explosives, you're going to really do some favors for yourself. So, but when it comes to the way Vandy's offense is constructed, there are some pitfalls as far as creating a great, elite, above average passing game. There's some roadblocks that can happen along the way as well. And I'll talk about those next. All right. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. That's right. Did you know that Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball? And that makes getting tickets faster and easier? Well, prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So here's my favorite features, okay? When I log into Gametime, this is what I love the most, okay? I mean, the whole thing is great. Like everything that they do, I think, when you're buying tickets is a really phenomenal experience. But my favorite thing is the seat views. I love getting a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. I love understanding what you get. If you're going, let's say you're taking a trip to New York, okay? You look on Gametime and you look on the Gametime app and you're like, oh, this ticket price is awesome, okay? And then you click on the panoramic seat view. Well, you notice that you have an obstructed view because they do that at Yankee Stadium. Well, you can move on to the next seat and say, nah, I don't want that seat because of that. And that's great. Other ticketing apps probably wouldn't do that. And you would get there and have a obstructed view. And you're like, why did I pay so much? Gametime doesn't do that. They have the lowest ticket price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Also, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And what's really good is, let's say you're at lunch. You're discussing what your plans are, and somebody goes, ooh, I want to go to the Padres game. Oh, let's look on Gametime. Oh, 60% off? Yeah, last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, even concerts, comedy, theater, whatever the event is in town. Beer fest, who knows, right? Zone deals, pick the section. Gametime chooses the seats, flash deals. It's just an extra add-on bonus there. So this is great, man. And there's no surprise fees at checkout. So all of that is awesome. If that sounds awesome to you, this is what you need to do. You need to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, are you watching ESPN or Fox Sports and you're tired of all that shouting? I don't blame you. I would be too, which is why I made the switch, and you should too, to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So welcome back. Segment 2. Thank you for making Locked On Vandy your first listen every day. Shout out to you everydayers. Love you guys. And in the comments, if there's anything that you want to hear about, if there's any burning questions you have saying, Corey, you've got to take care of this. You've got to address this issue with me because I'm dying to know blank. Leave it in the comments. Thank you for listening. Be a friend, tell a friend, all that good stuff. Make sure you spread the word. So Vandy should have an above average passing game, which means the mark is 250 yards per game. And I think they can get pretty close to it, if not hit it for the season. Definitely, they're going to go well over that in some games, and they're going to go well under that in some games. But I think the overall average can top out at around 250. There's a lot of things going in their favor with the run game, but there are some things that I believe, and this is why I'm sticking with above average. I know it's kind of like the safe way out, but here's why. Here's some things that I think could potentially get in the way. I think if they're going to have a lot of success, if the offense is going to be successful, they're going to have a lot of success on the ground. And when you're chewing up yards on the ground, guess what else is chewing up? The clock. The new clock rules in Vandy's philosophy do not favor the passing game, or at least big time production in the passing game. Now, there's going to be some explosives created with a good running game because it just kind of goes hand in hand. It always happens. But to do it consistently, there's a chance that like you would look at the season and go, we're going to a bowl. We didn't pass very well. Our passing stats weren't very high, but we had success in the passing game. Like you could call your passing game a success and only average 200 yards a game. Why? Because most of those yards are on explosive plays that create points. And and if you have 200 yards passing, if you're going to be successful, you better have well over 300 yards rushing, which is very much possible given the talent we have in the backfield, given the talent we have at receiver spots, running jet sweeps, and also the quarterbacks being involved in the run game as well. So I think there's a lot of factors involved with there being a really strong run game. So that could factor in and could eat into some of the pass plays and the pass production just right there. Just having a team that's going to average 300 yards a game rushing can really put a damper on that. And that's not really a damper. I mean, if that's the reason, because Vandy's rushing for 350 yards a game or 300 yards a game, and that's the reason, I'll take that in a heartbeat. All right. But, there's also that fear, I think, and I think it's just a fear at this point. To me, when I look at what's happened since November, I think that fear is probably not as founded as people think. But, people like to say, oh, Vandy was 2-10 last year. They suck. They always suck. And, it's just Vandy. And until Vandy quits Vandying, they're going to be Vandy. And they're going to go 2-10 again, or 3-9, which would win you on FanDuel. All right. But you say all that. But it's just fear that Vandy's just going to 3 and out, 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 3 and out. That was last year's bunch. They didn't have an identity. They didn't know what to do with their quarterbacks. They had these receivers getting open, couldn't get the ball to them. They couldn't run on 9-man boxes. The receivers were wide open because they were 9-man boxes. Couldn't get the ball to them. Right? Puts a damper on your offense if you can't get the ball to your best players. Right? But I think Vandy has now have an identity. They now have a plan. They now understand that. I think you have a coordinator that understands his quarterback because they've been together for the last 2 years with Diego Pavia and Tim Beck. I think they understand what the goal is, what they want to accomplish, what they want to do offensively, how they want to move the ball, or as Hank Stram says, how they want to matriculate the ball down the field, right? They want to do so on the ground. Now, with that, there's going to be play action. With that, there's going to be RPO. And I think it's, one may heavily favor the other. And I think it's going to be the run game that's going to heavily favor the pass game. I don't think Vandy's going to sit back there and throw it a whole bunch. That could eat into opportunity. But at the same time, you're sacrificing passing stats. But if you're getting first downs, it's not much of a sacrifice now, is it? Right? And I guarantee you, and by show of hands in the comments, I guarantee you that you would take 300 yards rushing per game if it meant that you wouldn't break 200 yards passing every game. And if that led to 6 wins, you'd be ecstatic. Because I think 6 wins right now for this team, as it currently stands, is the ceiling. All right? So just the nature of the philosophy of the offense could eat into pass game opportunity. Also, if you got injuries, because Vandy's got some talent now. They did really well in the portal. They got some really good freshmen coming in. But if you look at the roster depth, it's just not enough of people that you would say, this dude's a big-time player. There's not enough of them right now. And that's kind of where Vandy is. I think if they have minimal injuries, they will still do very well. But if they get a rash of injuries, it's over. They can't sustain a bunch of injuries. And if they get a bunch of injuries, they're going to turn into last year's team just because they're just going to be working with freshmen and walk-ons at that point. They're going to get slaughtered because their schedule is absolutely brutal. Like, imagine going into Texas and having 3 of your offensive linemen down. You ain't protecting anything. There ain't going to be any passing going on. There's not going to be much of anything going on if that happens, right? So that's another factor that I think could potentially eat into what your production is. Now, they've got all fall camp to kind of develop some depth, and I think that changes in philosophies, changing how they practice, they're more competitive. Seems like they've got better strength staff, and some of these guys, these down the line guys, are a little bit better off than they were last year. So you've got that going for you. Also, like, change in philosophy also gives you a chance to develop some guys that normally probably wouldn't develop as quickly under old philosophies and old regimes and old whatever. So you've got a bunch of opportunity there. You've got some things happening. You just got to execute them. But if you're looking at just straight raw numbers and saying, oh, can Vandy hit X number? It's way complicated. It's a good food for thought, but it's very, very complicated. Very complicated in the fact that you just have to have a lot of things go right with that to be able to hit those numbers. So, I think it'll be very interesting. Be definitely something to monitor. But I definitely think the perfect description of Vandy's offense, of Vandy's pass game, will be above average. I think that hits a really good number. That hits your goal is 250 per game. I think you're successful bowl team with 250 yards per game. But I think an above average pass game would be anywhere from 230 to your goal, and above would be great. You go north of your goal, you're great. So mark this one down. This is a goal. Mark this one down. So in November, we're going to look at this and say, did Vandy hit this number or not? We're going to do like a report card at the end of the year. We're going to do some progress reports too along the way. But are they hitting their numbers? Yes or no? And we'll tell you the story why in November. So stay tuned for that. But speaking of which, there's a very underrated game. Very underrated. And it's going to be a very important game. But you look at the team they're playing and you might not think so. I'll tell you why in a second. All right, wrapping up the show here. Locked On Vandy on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Make sure you like and subscribe at Locked On Vandy, at Coach Burton 36. Also, make sure you check out Locked On SEC, Locked On Ole Miss, Locked On Auburn. Make sure you check out all the Locked On shows after this one, of course, and see what's going on the other side of the fence. Be good for you. But anyway, thank you to the everydayers who make all this possible. Thank you for those that are just joining us and anyone else in between those two things, brand new or everydayers. Thank you for the part-timers. Part-timers, leave me a comment. How can I make you a full-timer? All right. All that stuff. I welcome the feedback. Let's get this thing going. So you're probably reading the rundown over here and saying Alcorn State will also be a very important game. You're probably thinking this, and this is why you're wrong. You're probably thinking, Alcorn State's an important game? Why? What are you, like, it must be June if you're doing shows on Alcorn State. You're probably thinking that, right? I know you are. But hear me out on this, because when you think about it, you're like, well, dang, this game's very important, because it's the second game of the year, and it follows what's going to be a very emotionally draining, physically draining, mentally draining football game against Virginia Tech. Win or lose, Vandy's going to be spent. And so, win or lose, this game will tell you everything you need to know about how Vandy's going to respond throughout the course of the season. If they get their butts kicked against Virginia Tech, how do they respond against Alcorn State? Do they return the favor against Alcorn State? Do they continue to struggle? What happens? Let's say Vandy loses a close one. Are they going to be the same thing? Are they going to beat the crap out of Alcorn State, or are they going to struggle? Let's say Vandy wins. Are they going to come in with big heads and struggle and almost lose? I mean, they struggled against Alabama State. That was a very telling game last year. That was a very, very telling game last year, because it kind of set the tone, because then they get hockey punched against UNLV out there in Las Vegas, and the season torpedoes into the ground. Like this game, if they struggle, regardless of what happens, you struggle and alarm bells are going off. You have to be sharp in this game. You have to be playing walk-ons late in the third quarter or fourth quarter in order for you to kind of be set up for success, because you have to execute. You have to play sharp. You have to play this game like they're Tennessee. Because you're Vandy and you went 2-10 last year, you have to play every game like that. You have to be focused, because you're not good enough to not be focused against Alcorn State and then turn around the next week and travel down to Atlanta and play a very good, well-coached Georgia State team before kicking off your SEC slate at Missouri. You can't do that. It's a very important game. And it's right after the most important game of your season, which is the opener. Now, when you look at Alcorn State, okay, not a whole lot of preview on them, but here's what happened. They went 6-2 in the SWAC last year. They had a late season loss to Texas Southern, or they would have been the West team in the conference championship against Florida A&M. Now, I don't know how they would have fared against the Rattlers, but they would have had their shot. They were a very, very good team. And they're going to be in it again. They have a new quarterback. Aaron Allen was great last year, quarterback, but he graduated. So Tyler Macon will be the new starter. Tyler Macon, he saw action in 5 games last year. He only completed 13 pass attempts, but he's a talented dude. But, I mean, he didn't get much opportunity because Aaron Allen was balling out. So, like, they've got some things that they do very, very well. So anytime you play a team that's like that, they can swack on in here and take your cookies and beat you down and win, because they're a good team. They know how to win. And if you struggle, they're going to take advantage of it. That's what football is. You have to be sharp. And if you're not sharp, this could set up your season. This game as a response game, regardless of what happens, this game as a response game, I'll say it again, is important. You have to, because Alcorn State is replacing a new quarterback early in the season, you have to take advantage of that. All right? They've still got talent. They've still got a very talented roster, but you're Vandy. You have to take advantage of that. Those receivers can't do anything against you because your cornerbacks are the strength of your team, arguably. Their new quarterback is going to have to commit 4 turnovers because you blitzed them, and C.J. Taylor had a couple of picks. Special teams is going to have to dominate. Offense is going to have to rush for 350 yards because that's just what you have to do against Alcorn State, because that's a statement game. That's a response game. That's the game you say, it's not like if you beat Virginia Tech, that's the game where you come out and thump Alcorn State and say, I don't know, guys. this may not be a fluke. Or you come out and thump Alcorn State after a loss and you're like, that was just a blip on the radar. We're ready to play now. We'll work out the kinks. Whatever the result is in the Virginia Tech game, this game is important. And you can't sleep on it because they very well could have contended for a SWAC championship last year. So overlook this game if you wish. I still have it as a win. I still think with the new philosophy, the new changes, the overhaul, the change in mindset, I think this could be your typical SEC FCS game where it's route. But you have to be sharp. And you can't understate it. You have to be sharp. This game is very, very important, right? And a pass game will help you get there. Any questions? Leave it in the comments. Like, subscribe, whatever. If you like the show, great. Come on back. We'll welcome you. All right. But until then, we're going to see you back here tomorrow. And likely doing a crossover. So we're going to learn about the Gamecocks. Stay tuned for that. That'll be fun. Be my first crossover. It'll be fun. Trust me. Love you guys. Have a great day. Anchor down.